Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. Today we have another set of great stories about crazy people and their revenge for you to enjoy. Subscribe to our channel if you're new here, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. To the story. Didn't intend to profit off a scammer, but my hands were tied. Years ago, I was quite involved in an active online community of analog audio hobbyists. People would occasionally put hardware and music up for sale on the message board we used. I'd been looking for a specific piece of hardware for several years to no avail. It was extremely rare and had never been sold in the US, so any examples would have been imported from Japan. One of these machines popped up for sale from someone in the community, and I jumped on it. The guy offering it wasn't new, but wasn't terribly active. Somehow he'd obtained pics that weren't on the net and or not easily searchable and ginned up a fake Japanese bill of sale. In hindsight, he may have seen one for sale and stolen the images from that. Regardless, it all seemed legitimate enough to induce me to go through with the transaction. So PayPal sent, and he says it'll ship in about a week. Then the excuses began, from he's been busy to out of town to his assistant shipped it but didn't send the tracking number to providing a fake tracking number. Then he just quit responding to calls or emails. Turns out the number he'd given me was a forwarding service that he subsequently disconnected. He also disappeared from the forum. He had, however, used his real name and a real PayPal account. I filed a PayPal claim, and of course they denied the claim on some technicality. I'm sure he was counting on this occurring. This is where the revenge begins with an unintended bonus. All I wanted to do was make sure the guy knew I'd find him and get to him. I'd called the police and reported matters, but they couldn't have given less of a damn. I decided to find him myself and found an old wedding announcement that had been posted on the net. I searched his wife's name and found mention of her being out on leave to give birth to their first child on her work website. Bingo! I had a small gift sent to her workplace with my name on it and called her work to say that I'm an old friend and don't have their contact info but want to wish them congratulations on the new child, and said that I'd come see him soon. I had visions of his wife saying how nice it is that someone sent a gift to her work, etc., and asking who I was. This apparently spooked him, because a cashier's check showed up for the full amount. Now, what I hadn't counted on and didn't tell him was that I'd filed a chargeback with American Express after PayPal denied the claim. My conundrum was this. The Amex investigation was ongoing, and I had no idea if they'd overturn the chargeback or not. I also had no idea if the cashier's check was legit. I've heard of counterfeit checks being returned up to 45 days later, so I truly didn't intend to profit off this. But I did. The Amex chargeback was resolved in my favor, which PayPal clawed back from his account shortly after the check was proven good. The kicker is, the guy had the gall to email and threatened to try to have me charged with fraud for the chargeback when he'd already sent the check. I simply responded and said, "Hey, great to finally hear from you. Glad you're doing well. How's the baby? Listen, I'm sure there's just been a mix-up, and I'll be happy to pay everything just as soon as I get the machine. I'm sure you understand why I want to receive it before I pay at this point. Of course, if you do want to call the police, you're welcome to explain to them how you attempted to defraud me by selling something you never possessed in the first place. Your call." Never heard another word. Unintentionally scamming a scammer the exact dollar amount he scammed you? I don't normally advocate an eye for an eye, but this just feels right. And our next story. Short me on pay, huh? About 15 years ago, I took a 1099 gig, hauling private cars from the upper Midwest to LA and Phoenix. This guy was a bit shady, but I wanted away from my prior job, and I figured I could deal with it as the money was good. He was quite a piece of work, booking cars and then basically refusing to answer any calls after they were picked up, which would occasionally result in a threat to have the police waiting when I contacted the customer about delivery. I also came to realize after a few weeks that he and his wife were speed freaks. But moving on. We were paid for our trips every week as soon as we got back to town. Most of what we did was COD, cash on delivery, and our pay would be counted out of the cash part of that. Some money would be in checks. After I'd worked there about 6 months, a slow week happened and they were unable to get enough cars to make a load home. but were able to get enough to get me to Denver and then back to LA to reload and come home. No big deal, had enough in the bank to cover bills at home, and wouldn't be the first time I was out longer than a week, so the wife and kids understood. So I get to the yard, grab all my paperwork, and head to his house to get paid. He normally just sits at his desk and runs the numbers and counts out the cash to pay us. This time, about halfway through, he grabs everything and heads upstairs, saying he'll be right back. Apparently 40 minutes counts as right back to a speed freak, and he finally comes back down and gives me this spiel about how I can only pay you for the outbound trip because insert various bullcrap excuses here. The real reason for not being able to pay me is that too many cars on that particular trip were not COD, and he found reasons to drop what cars he could pay me for until that number was low enough that he had enough cash in hand. I kept my cool and took what he offered and acted as if it was no big deal. I planned on running the next turn, keeping what he owed me, and walking away. I did my turn, told them where to find the truck, not our normal spot, but in the same town, and left. Unfortunately, that turn was heavy in checks and there wasn't enough cash to cover what I was due. I initially kept enough in checks to make up the difference, but decided the next day that I wasn't going to cash checks written to the company and went to his house to give him the checks. That went about as well as you would imagine it would. It's kind of amusing to be called a thief by a crook. The final exchange of the visit. Him. You're just a stupid truck driver. You'll never see any of that money. Me. I may be a stupid truck driver. I'm not. But you'll be sorry you effed with me. And I walked away. First stop. Request IRS determination of status as employee or contractor. Plenty of trucking companies pay via 1099, even though it's plain the drivers are employees. It's an area the IRS has been cracking down on. After these determinations, the IRS will also start asking pointed questions about withholding, questions for which he had not answers. Second stop. State Labor Board with IRS determination in hand, filing a complaint for failure to pay wages. This drug on for a few months, typical bureaucracy, until he had ignored enough of their letters that we could move on. In this particular state, if the Labor Board did the small claims filing, it could only be for the wages. If I filed the claim myself, I could claim up to 2 or 3 times the amount if it was willful non-payment as punitive damages. The Labor Board, like the IRS, would have questions of their own that weren't just going to go away. Third stop. Small claims court. He never responded to the claim until the day before the hearing when I received a letter from the bankruptcy court that he had filed for bankruptcy. Fourth stop. United States Bankruptcy Court. By now, this is months later, and it was amusing because she had obviously, as in 50 pounds obviously, come off the speed. My paperwork was done as if by a professional, to the point the judge jokingly asked if I could teach paperwork classes to the attorneys who frequented his courtroom. Nothing really memorable happened that day, other than the look on the judge's face when their lawyer said, "We don't agree with the IRS determination," and had no answer to the question, "Why not?" We were awarded our owed wages. 2 other guys who had since quit this idiot had piggybacked on the work I'd done on this. He wasn't amused by the big smile I gave him out front of the courthouse as we left, but he knew that this time he was on the receiving end of the shaft. Fifth stop? Well, we each got about 1/3 of what was owed to us before he quit paying the bankruptcy trustee. And Dummy, my former employer, lost his business. All 3 trucks were repossessed. He now has a nasty mark on his credit, and last I heard he was driving a POS truck for somebody else out in Vegas. That was more satisfying than the money, which I had long since gotten past missing. And our last story. Nice little thank you to a lawyer. Several years ago, I was involved in a fall at work, injuring my arm. After fighting the workers' comp insurance company for close to a year and being denied, I went ahead and had surgery to fix my arm on my own insurance, costing me thousands out of pocket. I asked an attorney who handled something for me a couple of years earlier if he would handle working with the insurance company, and he highly recommended one that had an office down the hall from his. Let's call him IL, Idiot Lawyer, for short. Things seemed to go well, although very slowly. IL explained that lawyer time was different from regular time, and I needed to be patient. Cut to over 2 years later with very little movement, and one day I get an email from IL telling me that the workers' comp insurance wants to settle. Finally. I get the paperwork, and there, buried deep in the document, is a statement that if I sign, I basically admit to lying to my company and the insurance company. The kicker? They offer $450 to settle. My out-of-pocket was close to $8,000. Like any reasonable person, I said absolutely not. Over the next few months, IL began to increasingly pester me to settle. I made it crystal clear that would not be happening with the offer that was in place. Also, I told him that I didn't care if it was $1 million, I would not sign anything that said I lied to anyone. Because of my refusal to sign, a hearing was scheduled with the state to get everything settled. A week before the hearing, IL sent me an email literally begging me to settle. Nope. So like any good attorney looking out for his client's best interests, he withdrew his counsel at the last minute, leaving me in quite a bind. I scrambled to get another attorney, found one, and she got postponement of the hearing. Cut to 6 months later, we ended up in mediation with new lawyer and the workers' comp insurance company. Long story short, we ended up settling for low 6 figures, out of which IL would have gotten a nice 5-figure payday. After that, I mailed a copy of my check to IL with a nice note thanking him for all the work he'd put into my case. Strangely, I've not heard back from him. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.